attacks religion. It's much better to attack religion than to try to emulate it as a caricature, making use of its name and its fame and its importance, but distorting it. But we live in such a world. We need more than talk. We need a reality of existence. We need people who can act as examples, from sportsmen to intellectuals, from writers to inventors. In every domain, we need people as models for devout Muslims who are dedicated really to the teaching of Islam and the Prophet, who at the same time love their society, love their fellow men, women, and the rest of nature, who are at the same time concerned with what concerns the young. I keep coming back to this world of nature. I'm the first person to have written about the environmental crisis, long before Lynn White or anybody else in the 1960s. And Dr. Becker here worked with this on this issue, was the first in the Malay world to have done that. This issue is the key to the life of the young, because if it's not going to be the future, why do all this talking? We need to have this idea of tawakkul ala Allah, that God takes care of His creation, and we are the Khalifatullah fil ard, given by God the duty to protect and to care for creation. How many of you know families, even in the West, where a 10-year-old knows more about nature than his 50-year-old father, and criticizes his father and mother for being indifferent? This is the day in which we live. We have a very, very rich tradition of the Islamic world, and many young Muslims can be brought back to the other aspects of Islam, which alhamdulillah is still alive, as some of the speakers pointed out, by showing them that Islam contains the solutions to the most urgent problems of our day, which they do not think are the question of riba and things like that. The thing is the question of the air they're going to breathe in a few years, the water they're going to drink, and every practical thing of this kind. So we have a tremendous resource to draw from, but sometimes tremendous responsibility to draw from it. Your Excellency, I know this is also the subject of your concern in Pakistan, because I've read some of the things you've written and said it here and there, unfortunately not all. But a country like Pakistan, which is like my own country, if it doesn't pay attention to such issues, the next generation is not going to be able to live. Same with Iran, my own country, or any other country. I'm not trying to point Pakistan out as the only country. And we are the heirs to civilization, which was always based on harmony with God, harmony with the world, harmony with heaven, harmony with earth, in which all of Islamic city planning, architecture, everything, and both had a religious character and was sanely balanced environmentally. What have we done with it? We have to revive this, and we have to revive this on the basis of faith. And if you present these things to the young, they'll listen to it. About 60 years of experience of teaching in my own country, Iran, and the West, and other Islamic countries, and I know that once you talk about matters in this way, that is contemporary and understandable, a lot of people will listen. People are not interested in fine points of law, which the Taliban in Cairo had to attend to learn, if you learned centuries ago. That's sacred and very important. That should be there. But we need actually to bring out these issues. And Your Excellency, I don't want to just to talk about Pakistan, but you're one of the very few Muslim leaders who is aware of these issues. Why don't you make Pakistan a place where meetings such as this take place regularly, where leaders even of young people who are interested in these things are brought to discuss these issues, and it will spread. There's no other place in the Islamic world which does it. No place. And inshallah, gradually this awareness will increase. As some of our speakers have said, the solution is not an immediate 24-hour engineering solution. It is will take longer time, and I repeat, and I will end with this, the fact that a sitting prime minister of a country who's usually, like every other country, concerned with what's going to happen tomorrow, is now also concerned with what's going to happen after tomorrow, is a very good sign. That's a very, very good sign, and let's follow it, inshallah.
Dr. Hamza Yusuf, I want your comments just on this. The problems I'm having in Pakistan, and I'm sure this is a problem in most of the Muslim world, that there are two sorts of crimes in the society. One is corruption, and the other is sex crime. We find that sex crime has risen very sharply in our society, which means rape as well as child abuse. And unfortunately, only 1% of sex crime is reported. So which means law enforcement can basically just deal with 1%. The other 99%, I feel the society has to fight it. Same with corruption. You can, maybe deal corruption at a certain level, but then when government officials keep taking money, bribes at a low level, I feel that it is again, a society has to make corruption unacceptable. And unfortunately, when you have leadership which is corrupt over a period of time, they make corruption acceptable. So this is not just a problem in Pakistan, it's probably in most of the Muslim world as well as the developing world. So, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, your views?
I think both problems, they're profound problems that have to do with appetite. The shahwa is a fundamental thing in the human being, that God has put appetites in us for good reasons, for healthy reasons. But these appetites become perverted, and so the desire for wealth is a natural desire because we need wealth. But when that desire becomes inordinate, when it becomes something that is greedy, and then we begin to harm the society, something's gone seriously wrong. So this is a deep problem in many, many places, including the United States. There's no country that's exempt, but it's the degree with which the corruption, like an apple, if you have a small piece of corruption, you can remove it and it's still a good apple. But as it increases throughout the fruit, at a certain point, you just throw the apple away. So this is a huge problem, and I know you're addressing this. But one of the things that people have to understand about this is that the selfishness of that individual is, in the end, harms himself. إِنَّمَا بَغِيكُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ. The Quran says your corruption is against yourselves. It harms yourselves. This inordinate desire. In terms of the sexual problem, this has to do with a loss of chivalry, a loss of fatuwa, a loss of the qualities that decent men have. It's very important for men to understand that they are قوامون الرجال قوامون على النساء, that God has given us and tasked us with the care of women and children. If you look at society, if you just walk around, everything you see almost without exception was built by men. Men built the roads, they built the houses, they put the plumbing, the infrastructure. Why did they do this? They did this for women and children. This is the fundamental impulse in men. And so we have to inculcate in our young men especially this idea of honoring women. The Prophet ﷺ said, "La yukrimuhunna illa kareem." Only noble people honor women. وَلَا يُهِينُهُنَّ إِلَّا لَئِيمٌ. And only contemptible people will dishonor women or degrade women. So it's very important that the women in the culture, the mothers, they raise their sons with that sensibility, but also the fathers have to be exemplars in this. It's very important, but this is a huge problem, and I think the fact that you're speaking about these things, because often in our cultures, because we have shame-based cultures, often these things are not spoken about, but just the fact that you're bringing this to the forefront is very important because it will empower people. But also, we have to follow the sunnah of the Prophet. There's a lot of, in the modern world, a lot of women have, they feel like they don't need this idea of the mahram. They don't need this idea of the guardianship. Our tradition protects women. And if it doesn't, it means our tradition is not present. So it's really important for the women to understand that there are reasons why the Prophet ﷺ emphasized these things, like the mahram, of not going to places that where you shouldn't be. That onus is obviously first and foremost on the men, and we can't blame the victims, and that would be completely unjust and wrong. But at the same time, women need to understand that there are wolves out there, and those wolves are real. And so it becomes a matter of the men taking upon themselves the protection, the guardianship of the women, especially the young women and the children. I mean, these are some of the greatest crimes against people.
Dr. Abdul Hakim Murad, the same question, but the problem what we are facing is that because of the mobile phone, the sort of information available on the mobile phone for young people, for children, is unprecedented in history. I mean, there's positive information, and of course there's a pornographic material which is available, and I feel that one of the reasons why we are suddenly having sex crimes, and not just women, I mean, I'm talking about children. So I feel that this is something which I think most societies are grappling with right now. So your views, Dr. Murad?
Recently, the school that I attended 40 years ago, which during my period as a schoolboy accepted girls for the first time, and during my 5 years there, I never saw or heard of any kind of impropriety or outraging of the girls, who were always treated with sort of respect. The traditional English gentleman, opened doors and was respectful for women and respected their public inviolability. Last year, the girls at the school went public with an outrageous story about how there were hundreds and possibly thousands of cases of harassment, exposure, teasing, outraging of various kinds. And this has become part of our culture wars now, unfortunately, because the liberals don't want to censor anything. But everybody knows that the key trigger has, as Your Excellency has pointed out, the availability, even to young children, of high-resolution images of things that, in the nature of things, should be private and not made part of public entertainment. And particularly the adolescent mind, if it grows up recurrently addicted to such images, the neuroscientists have pointed out that this results in permanent damage. And so it's part of the global crisis at the moment, and the internet is something that is one of those globalizing phenomena that isn't really subject to the control of the nation state. Increasingly, the nation state is less powerful than it used to be. Something like Bitcoin, something like the internet, something like climate change. Many of the big issues today are things that have to be resolved globally rather than by individual states. How one deals with that? Well, we find, again, those individuals who come to Islam in England, who I work with, most of them are women. Many of them find the hijab, the traditional restraint, the understanding of strict boundaries between men and women, a kind of liberation. They don't like being in the law of the jungle and the world of vulnerability, abuse, sex crime, harassment, online dating. They want something that is more reasonable. So again, there is a catastrophe out there, but it's not the religions that have produced the catastrophe. It's another epiphenomenon of modernity. So to revert to your question to Sayyid Hossein Nasr, in order to attract the young people, we have to not just answer all of the questions that are coming from their modernity, but to point out that the crisis of modernity is ever continuing, ever escalating. Climate change is one aspect. Catastrophe over views of gender and appropriate behavior between the genders. The Me Too movement in America is huge globally, not just in the Muslim world. To see Islam with its very balanced ideas of gender, sexuality, appropriate relationship, hijab, as actually an amazing solution, and a solution that many young people who are joining Islam now have found to be a solution, as being a very good way of holding their attention, treating Islam not just as a heritage of old-fashioned things that need somehow to be justified, but rather as a divinely authored medicine chest remedies for the ever spiraling catastrophes of an out-of-control secular world.
Dr. Rajab Shantruk, can you please just explain to us the sort of problems? Are these the sort of problems you're having in Turkey?
Yes, Your Excellency, these are global problems, we face everywhere, not only in the UK or America or Pakistan or in Turkey, everywhere, because we are living under the influence of what they call globalization. And during this period, what I advise to our youth is to adopt the ethics of futuwa, which means youth ethics, derived from the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and it was codified in manuals for the youth. They received it and they put it in practice. So today, this is what's missing. Although the concept of futuwa was commonly shared in all Muslim societies, in Pakistan, in Persia, in Turkey, in the Arab world, everywhere. So this is what's missing today. And today we are under the threat of postmodern, liberal, individual, subjective, relativist, post-truth ethics, and our youth is under the threat of extravagant consumption. The advertisements from all directions. In addition to the problems Professor Nasser and Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad mentioned, I believe the most important threat today is this postmodern worldview and the postmodern ethics. And the only way our youth can resist to this very powerful trend is adopting the futuwa ethics, which was derived from the Sunnah. So this requires a strategy of rooted revival. Of course, we can't replicate the past as it is, but we need to preserve our roots and adopt a revivalist approach. Our youth should not be reactionary nor apologetic, but with self-confidence, recovering the memory of the past, feeling proud with our civilization, with our religion, with our history, and they should work for intellectual independence from the hegemony of this postmodern culture today. And our education should educate our youth to gain intellectual independence from this hegemonic culture and from globalization, to think for themselves, following the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad. But at the same time, our youth should ask the following question: what I can do for the world? So we should work for the solution of the world problems, not only for the problems of Muslims. This is the concept of rahmatan lil alameen. We should be rahmah for the Africans, for the Latin Americans, for the Russians, the Chinese, the Indian, for everyone in the world, regardless of their religion, regardless of their color, regardless of their race and citizenship. And this is what the futuwa ethics teaches us, to reflect the qualities of Prophet Muhammad, who was the rahmatan lil alameen. And the most important sunnah is to be rahmatan lil alameen.
Dr. Chandra, your views of what you see in Malaysia, youth in Malaysia, and what you can tell us about that.
If I may perhaps reflect upon what has been said and try to draw out the essence of our discussion and put it in a particular context. And what is that context? It would be a very good idea, Your Excellency, if one got youths themselves to speak up. In other words, the next meeting should not be a meeting dominated by those of us who are in our 60s and 70s, perhaps getting young people who are in the 20s and 30s to come together. You saw the energy of young people participating in the climate change conference in Scotland. What they had to say, of course, a lot of it was perhaps condemnatory. They were angry, and rightly so, but they had some very good points. I think if we could bring them together, Your Excellency, to do three things. Number one, to articulate their position on what they think is wrong with the world and why they think we need some urgent solutions. If you could get them to articulate their positions. We talk about sex crimes, about corruption, and so on. Do they also see these as the real challenges? Perhaps they do. I suspect they do. But maybe there are other dimensions that they're aware of, which we are not aware of. So number one, that would be a major challenge. Number two, I think this idea of Rahmatul Alamin and the relationship to young people. Why do they see our own traditions, our value systems, the principles which are embodied in our great philosophical truths? Why do they see that as the Rahmatul Alamin? Do they? Perhaps they see this as vital. I've talked to young people, Your Excellency, and sometimes feel that they have a clear idea of the dignity of human beings. And they can relate their dignity to spiritual values, to moral standards. It'd be nice to hear them take that position, that this is the blessing for the whole of humankind. If we can get them to address that, that'll be the second major challenge. And the third, an area where we have failed. Generations of people with strong spiritual positions have somehow failed to show that this spiritual inheritance is a shared inheritance. It is not exclusive to any of us. It's not exclusive to Muslims, for instance. That many of the great truths, for instance, about the climate crisis, it's shared by all the great traditions. I'm glad that Prophet Hussein Nas made a reference to his own book about this. It was one of the earliest books that dealt with this challenge from a spiritual angle, from a multi-spiritual angle. And I think that is what people should be talking about. I asked some friends who attended the meeting in Scotland whether there were young people who made any reference to that book, because it is a book that had an impact on me as a young person decades ago. But they hadn't. And yet it's such a pity, because it is a book that unites people on this fundamental question of the crisis facing humankind today from a spiritual perspective, a shared spiritual perspective. So I think it would be good if we could bring young people together to cross cultures, to cross boundaries, and take a shared position. Unfortunately, not many friends of ours and other faiths see Islam as having that sort of position, and yet that is so much a part of Islam. It was a part of Islam even before the Prophet preached his central mission to humankind. He brought people of different traditions together, Hiful Fuzul, as a way of showing that there was a common bond that held them together. And I think this is what we have to do again. In this moment, at this time in history, we have to show that if you look at the climate crisis, you look at the nuclear crisis, if you look at the COVID crisis, every crisis, it manifests itself in a multidimensional way. It affects all human beings. These are shared challenges, shared burdens, and we have to bring out a shared message. Islam did it so beautifully centuries ago. We have to do it again. Thank you.
Dr. Usman Bakar, just what I wanted to ask you was your views specifically in what you think about the Malaysian youth. How do you see it transforming? What would you recommend to them? And of course, Muslims all over, but specifically, I mean Malaysia.
Your Excellency, I think just to complement what Dr. Chandra has mentioned, in a sense, yes, told us a very important aspect of the youth in Malaysia. But I find that mainly through students in universities and colleges, there is very interesting development, which is encouraging in the sense that they feel that they need to know the religion from a different approach. And certainly they talk about a kind of marginalized Islam. In other words, the Islam that is being pursued as being maintained by the old generation is not the kind that they are really fond of, they're interested, but it doesn't mean that they lack the spirit, they lack the inspiration to, for example, to know our spiritual tradition, our intellectual tradition, and this is an area where I personally have been engaged for a long time. In other words, that they feel that this is what they need more. In other words, with due respect to the whole generation whose commitment to religion, has contributed many things, but they feel that perhaps something about religion, especially in Malaysia, being a multi-religious country, a very pluralistic society, more than 40% of the population are non-Muslims. For example, I encourage them for dialogue, because I really feel, I know Dr. Chandra has been with me before in both interreligious dialogue or intercultural dialogue. The idea is that for the future, it's very, very important for Malaysia that if you want to bring about stability and a good future for the country, we must have interfaith harmony. And that is something new, which the old generation is indifferent to it, but the younger generation, I find that more and more of them are coming out. They want to know more what Islam has got to say about interfaith, interreligious relationship. And of course, I think in the case of Malaysia, because when we talk about intra-Islamic relations, it's quite different, say, from Pakistan, because we belong to the same school of thought, denomination. So the problem is less, but still we have to deal with the question of intra-Islamic unity. The contest now is between the traditional sector and the modern educated, but who want to turn to Islam. So I think there are both, like I see, two parallel developments. One, the kind of development, of course, the impact, the negative impact of modernization, of new forms of modernity on the young. But on the other hand, the same facilities, like the cyberspace, for example, are being used by another group of the young people for the larger, for the benefit of the religion and society. Thank you.
Sheikh Abdullah, can you please just not answer, but just give a message for the youth, the young people who are listening to you. I just want you to give them a message. What would you advise them, given the contemporary influences on them, all the issues caused by social media, inundation of knowledge, which never was available to children, young people at this age. So what would you advise the young people?
شكرا معالي رئيس الوزراء، أشكره وأريد أن أقول إن نحن إذا تكلمنا عن الشباب في دولة واحدة نكون قد ظلمناهم، لأن الشباب الآن متأثر بالعولمة. نحن نعيش عولمة أخلاقية وكما قال معالي رئيس الوزراء، السوشيال ميديا هذه الوسائط الاتصال هي تؤثر كثيرا في الشباب. ولأجل ذلك أنا أرى أن كلمة السكينة التي بدأنا بها، هو الذي أنزل السكينة في قلوب المؤمنين. كلمة السكينة هي كلمة مهمة جدا، لأن السكينة هي حالة تتنزل على النفوس وتؤثر في الأعمال. فلا بد أن نبحث عن هذه السكينة كي تتنزل في قلوب شبابنا. رسالتي للشباب هو السكينة، هو أخلاق السكينة. أخلاق السكينة هي أخلاق ليس فيها انفعال، الانفعال فيها لا يؤثر، بل الفعل يكون نتيجة للعقل وللدين، وليس نتيجة للغضب ولا نتيجة للأنانية. فالسكينة هي التي أنصح بها الشباب، لكني أنصح بشيء آخر، هو في موقع الرئاسة في بلد عظيم مثل باكستان أن تكون هناك جامعة للأخلاق. عندنا جامعة الهندسة، لماذا لا تكون في جامعة لهندسة الأخلاق النفوس، لتقدم دليل الأخلاق جاي للأخلاق. لا بد من شيء من الفلسفة وشيء من التصوف. لماذا فلسفة إقبال ليست معروفة كثيرا على مستوى الشباب؟ لماذا التعليم ليس جيدا؟ هذه كلها مسائل مؤثرة. لا بد من التعليم، لا بد من المثل، لا بد أن يتعلم بعض الشباب حتى يكون قدوة للشباب، تعليم بالنظير. فهذه هي المسائل التي أهتم بها. جامعة لهندسة العقول وهي جامعة الأخلاق، الفلسفة والتصوف، السكينة هي النتيجة، دليل الأخلاق. العولمة الآن هي أمر لا مرد له، فلا بد أن نتعامل معه بشيء من الفكر ومن الأخلاق النبوية التي هي الحقيقة التصوف الصحيح والفلسفة الصديقة، هي كلها تصب في أخلاق النبوية الشريفة. وأشكر فخامته وأحيي بلده.
Respected scholars, thank you for your enlightening views. I will again would like maybe once a month or once in 2 months ask you for a meeting where we can talk about contemporary issues that are very important for the Muslim world, to hear the views of scholars like you. And my whole idea of forming this Rahmatul Alameen authority, the idea is that we through the seerah of our Prophet, we unite human beings. And secondly, we raise the moral and ethical standards of our society, just like in the state of Medina, our Prophet did almost 1500 years ago. Thank you very much.